All right. So all you guys work on the bell ringer now. So you should be done with the reading now. For those of you at home, the reading was just page 48 to 50, weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. I'll put that in the lesson description then. But describe the two powers the central government had under the Articles of Confederation. What type of legislature did the AFC have? AFC is just Articles of Confederation. Okay? You guys work on that. All right, so let's go over this, guys. Two powers the central government had under the Articles of Confederation. What were they? Give me one, Tanner.
Regulate Indian affairs.
Okay, all right, yeah, good job. So it also is with foreign affairs, but yeah, Native American affairs. Good job, good job. So resulting communication with other countries, maybe establishing treaties, establishing peace amongst other countries. This is what that government was established and set up to do. The national government under the Articles of Confederation. Good, good. So we all know that's executive powers now. So the president, that's the powers granted to that branch of government in today's government, right? Good. What's another power we kind of talked about already? Brock, I think you said it already. What was it? Yeah, control the army. Good job. Control the army. And we know it's a little difficult to do, especially with that reading we just had on page 48, when the government can't afford to pay the army or really support the army. Okay, buy products, buy different types of weapons for them, and supply pensions or pay these veterans once they're finished with the war. And the anger coming from these colonists is clear as they're really destroying the state house, the legislative, the branch of government there in Philadelphia, and threatening these congressmen because really the central government, the national government, was too weak. Right. So those two powers, yes, that's what they had, they established, but it's real difficult to have this sense of central government when in all reality it's too weak. Right. And we'll talk about these weaknesses here today. Some of them. We'll get through some of them. Okay. So are there any questions on the two powers the central government had under Articles of Confederation? We all right with that? Okay. So like I said, I'd like to move to the weaknesses now. We're going to talk about a few of them, and maybe we'll talk about the achievements more tomorrow. All right. So the idea of the Articles of Confederation, in all reality, it was to make sure that this new government doesn't become too authoritarian. Okay. Doesn't become too authoritative. So under the British rule, the monarchy controlled everything. Okay, especially in the colonies, these people didn't have any types of rights. Okay, for the most part, they didn't have representation, right? And they were taxed without that said representation. So they wanted to make sure that the states had their own individual government that is established to make sure that they could run the doings, the executive forces, the legislative forces, judicial meetings within their own state. Okay, they want to make sure that the central government doesn't become too strong so that they don't repeat what was already occurring under their rule, right? Under their way of life in the colonies, as this absolute monarchy was too strong, right? So that was the whole goal of the Articles of Confederation. All right, I know I briefly stated the 6 problems yesterday. So we're going to first start off with the taxation power. The biggest weakness of the Articles of Confederation was that there was no taxes. Okay, they couldn't tax the people, meaning that they couldn't fund really anything. So the reason why they believed that taxes weren't a good idea is because the revolution was fought over mainly taxes, okay, and the lack of representation. So they thought, well, if we don't tax anybody, there won't be any types of upheavals, right? There won't be any types of revolts or rebellions. But we all know that taxes go to providing for the public, providing for the people. And we already talked about one of those functions, purposes of government is what? Public services. Okay. So education, roads, bridges, okay, parks, museums, you name it. Providing national defense, economic decisions, right? And we all know maintaining social order. So in all reality, without taxes, we won't have those purposes, those functions of government. Okay. So in all reality, it's a necessity that there are taxes, that the government has the ability to protect the people, to provide assistance to the people if need be through economic hardships, okay, to provide safety for the people through this social contract. You guys see how that all comes back together? All right. So without taxation, it was near impossible to have any type of power in a central government for the Articles of Confederation. It was just too weak, right? And if any other country wanted to try to target the United States, okay, obviously the Confederation would come together, but there really was no national standing army. And it was really up to the states to provide those troops, those soldiers, to whatever state is being targeted, being attacked. And with the Articles of Confederation, it almost pitted these states against one another. They almost acted like their own individual countries, okay, which we'll talk about when we get to economic decisions here. So number one, taxation problem. And like I mentioned, the purposes of government is a good example. The functions of government are good examples of what taxes are needed for. And without that power, this makes the central government very weak. All right, problem 2, no national court. All right, no national court. So under the Articles, there were no central court system. The judicial branch didn't even exist, right? So the Supreme Court wasn't even a thing. So how could they solve disputes between the states? Well, they couldn't. They couldn't. And let's face it, at that time, there were a lot of disputes between these states. Well, the main thing was trade, resources, okay, maybe representation amongst the states. How are they going to solve these issues? Well, they couldn't without a court system, without a judicial branch. So this ultimately made the Articles of Confederation, the central form of government, this national government, very weak. one of the main issues too with this is, let's say there was an entanglement or crime being done in Maryland at that time period. Let's say that person then flees to Pennsylvania. Are they suited for that crime yet in Maryland? Yeah, those Maryland officials want to try to get him and retrieve him back to Maryland, but they have to go up to Pennsylvania where maybe he is, well, obviously he's a free man, right? He didn't commit any crime in Pennsylvania. So how are they going to solve that dispute? Well, the states are going to have to negotiate with one another in order to get that man who committed a crime in Maryland back to Maryland to trial for. But if you want to reside in Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania didn't want to look into it, which at that time was really hard to find people without social media, phones, technology, this guy was a free man. He could just kind of roam and do whatever he wants without the sense of a national court there to hold these disputes between the states. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah, so in other words, he could just flee to another state and he'd be fine, right? He'd be fine. Pretty interesting. So again, another problem, another weakness with the Articles of Confederation, no national court. All right, so problem number 3, no standard currency. No standard currency. So each state had their own currency, meaning that they had their own economic system where the states, depending on where you're at, depending on the economy in that said state, with the purchasing power, with whatever types of, at that time, cash crops that you had, your economy might be stronger, right? And depending on how much money is in circulation in that said state, inflation plays a huge role. So it's going to be difficult to really buy products. Let's say if you're from Pennsylvania, you want to go down to Virginia to buy, say, tobacco. You'd have to translate your money, make sure it's up to code with inflation rates. And the worth of that dollar might be totally different than comparable to Virginia's currency. So you can imagine the headaches that could have been when trying to purchase an item from another state. You only could imagine, right? It'd be very, very difficult to manage, especially without technology today, right? Technology today, you kind of understand different types of inflation rates between countries to really understand exactly what you're worth, what your dollar's worth in another country. So at that time, very difficult. So here's a good example. Rhode Island is in debt. They keep printing off money. No one wants their money because it's worthless, right? The inflation rates are so high that the worth of that dollar is just so low. And if you try to purchase an item, let's say in Pennsylvania or a closer state like Connecticut or Massachusetts, then they'd have to try to understand the inflation rates and provide you with a currency that is worth that said dollar, that amount that you're looking to purchase in that other state. So again, a huge headache, a huge problem, since all the other states had their version of currency. Okay, there were no national currency. There wasn't. You guys good with that? If I'm moving too fast, let me know. All right, problem 4, no executive branch. So yeah, no judicial branch, no national court system, no Supreme Court. How they can decide the issues amongst the states? Big problem. Another branch of government that is just not even there is no executive branch, right? No president, no figurehead to look at and to make decisions when it comes to foreign diplomacy. At that time, the United States tried to keep out of foreign affairs, make sure that they could stay away from these certain entanglements with other countries, specifically European countries. Going to be very difficult to do, obviously, when we get to purchasing the frontier from France, right? And very difficult when we get to the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II. So now, obviously, that's a huge role for the president is foreign affairs, discussing and diplomacy with other countries. That time period, I guess it wasn't too much of a priority. George Washington himself even said that we need to stay out of foreign affairs, make sure that we can stay away from these entanglements that are occurring over in Europe. Across the Atlantic Ocean, there's no need to get involved. But the executive branch, really no one to enforce the law either, right? No one to enforce the laws. So this is going to be very, very difficult to do. One of the main reasons why the Articles of Confederation made sure that they did not include an executive branch is, well, it almost looked like a king, right? It almost looked like a monarch. And Washington himself even said when they wanted to continue his terms as president, he kind of set those 2 terms, 4 years, for a reason. And he believed that president shouldn't last any longer than that because he'll look like a monarch, something that the United States broke away from in the very beginning. So no executive branch. You guys good with that? Okay. Problem number 5, interstate commerce was not regulated. So Congress had no power to regulate trade. So when it came down to it, the states obviously traded crops, traded different resources, materials with one another. And if there ever was an entanglement between the states, an issue with the states, guess what they could do? They could tariff these goods coming from state to state, meaning that they're so much in competitive nature with each other that it created a lot of economic hardships, sanctions on certain states, depending on the leadership, obviously. And it almost looked like these states were kind of at economic wars with each other, trade wars with another. And when you're trying to unite the country after defeating Great Britain, the strongest country in the world at that time, this is not the way to go about it. Right? So the central government was too weak to even regulate the trade with and in between the states. So, certain example, let's say Virginia, obviously cash crop tobacco. Pennsylvania is trying to do the same thing. Right, so they start selling, Pennsylvania is starting to sell their tobacco at a lower cost than Virginia. And let's say Pennsylvania needs a good or resource from Virginia. Virginia is going to be like, you know what? We're going to tariff this good, make sure Pennsylvania pays a hefty, hefty tax on this. So this is going to result into some economic hardships. And what does Pennsylvania need to do then? Tax their people even more to afford these products. So people are going to be angry about that, causing revolts, rebellions within that said state, and causing a lot of hardships just because there were no regulations on trade amongst the states. So if the states are all competing against one another, that's going to be an issue. That's going to be a problem. There's going to be no unity. There's going to be issues amongst those states. You guys good with that? Does that make sense? Okay. Last one here, veto powers. Okay, veto power. So with the Articles of Confederation, they all agreed that all 13 states need to come together in order to amend the Articles of Confederation, in order to maybe change it. You know how hard it is to get everybody on the same page, right? To make sure that everybody's in agreement with one another. Okay, it's very difficult to do. So with that being said, in order to change the Articles of Confederation to give the national government more power, they needed all 13 states to come together and agree, hey, we need to change this. We need to adopt a new method of making the central government stronger. And in that time period, a lot of these people believe that states should have the majority of the power. So this is causing a huge issue already at the start of America's origins, really. So 13 states all had to agree to try to maybe change the Articles of Confederation or agree to obviously adopt a new form of government where the central government's a little bit stronger. And I think we all can agree if we have brothers and sisters in here, even our parents, we never always agree on the same things. That's for sure. Can you imagine 13 states doing that? Oh, it'd be unbelievable. So when it came to passing laws, okay, they needed 9 states of the 13 to agree to it. So 9 states to agree to change a law or let's say adopt a new law. Again, that's very difficult to do. And one of the main issues at that time, you think transportation was a big thing? Chase, do you think transportation was huge at that time period? Did they have roads? Did they have bridges? Did they have cars? No, they didn't. So to get all these representatives, let's say from Georgia, all the way up to Pennsylvania, it's going to be difficult. So many representatives didn't even show up to these meetings. They just plain and simple didn't show up. So there goes a vote, right? All right, and that's going to be difficult to even pass anything. Okay. All right, is there any questions on the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation? You guys good with that? All right, awesome. That's what I got for today. I had an assignment for you, but maybe we'll work on that tomorrow. Does that sound good? Cool, cool. I'm gonna play Trojan News Network here and that'll be it. Taylor, if you need to go and do whatever you need to do, there you go. Yeah, go ahead.